So good afternoon, everybody. So it's a pleasure today to have a new talk in this series of industrial talks, sponsored by IEEE Sequencing Systems Society Chapter Rio Grande do Sul and Council NDA of IEEE Chapter Brazil, with the support also of Federal University of Rio Grande do Sul, also of Brazilian Computer Society, Brazilian Microelectronics Society, and ABISEMI, that is the Association of Semiconductor Industries in Brazil. So today we are here to listen the talk of Rogerio Nunes. So Rogerio Nunes is the president of the Brazilian Semiconductor Industry Association. So he was co-founder also of the ABISEMI. So he's also vice president of Smart Motor Technologies, and he's going to give another talk in October 28 about smart. And he is also general manager of the company in Brazil. He's also the director of the Brazilian Electrical and Electronic Industry Association, ABINI, for the electrical and electronic component sector. And he holds a bachelor degree in electronic engineering from the Industrial Engineering College, FEI, and the MBA in business management from the Superior Advertising and Marketing School of São Paulo, ESPN, a well-known school in the field. His academic experience also includes working as a professor. So yes. Now the control is with you, Rogerio.
Thank you very much. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rogerio. Mr. Ricardo Hayes already introduced me. Thank you very much for the kind introduction. Thank you, Rafael, for the all the management of this webinar. I would like to also express my gratitude to Professor Hayes and the University of Federal University of Rio Grande do Sul to make this invitation to me to have this opportunity to explain and show what ABISEMI, where I am a founder, has been doing in Brazil. And with that, what ABISEMI can bring to Brazil market, and better saying, what is the expectations and opportunities for the market of semiconductor in Brazil. First, I would like to briefly explain about the Brazilian Association of Semiconductor Industry. ABISEMI was created in 2014, and with the purpose to create an environment for local semiconductor makers, semiconductor designers, and semiconductors related activity companies could define objectives for Brazil country to develop a policy to improve the local market, to improve especially the local manufacturing, the local design, and the local activities for the semiconductor. One of our major activities is actually the relationship with the public sector in order to let them know what is required for the semiconductor industry, for the semiconductor design companies to have in order to create an environment for development. So this is a very important, especially being in Brazil, where market is extremely regulated, where we have a country with so many taxes, and where we are far away from Asia, where we have the biggest market for semiconductor. So it's extremely important to have a very intense dialogue between companies for what they need in terms of business requirements, and then discuss with government what can be created in order to develop this market. ABISEMI intention is to bring competitiveness for Brazil. I think you all know we need because of the taxes implications, but work in a very ethical, in a very respectful, in a very transparent way. Our meetings are public. We have a website where you can see what are our deliberations, what are our topics, what we are discussing, what we are proposing to government institutions and companies in order to have a better environment for the entire country to develop this sector. We have, semiconductor is not so huge market in terms of number of companies globally. And of course, in Brazil, it's the same. But we do have, since 2004 now, 12, 13 actually, associated companies. And we have wafer fab companies with some local diffusion, like a CEDA, for instance, in Rio Grande do Sul state. We have packaging and the test companies, which is actually the biggest business in terms of revenues in Brazil. We have designing companies. We have university institutions where they have design of materials, product, and process for semiconductor development. The industry in Brazil already has a revenue of, in 2018, 3.4 billion reais. So I think we are living one of the best moments in the semiconductor in Brazil since the 80s, the years 80s, in terms of revenues and number of companies and technology. 2019 reduced a little bit to $3 billion reais. And that's because mostly of the price of the components. But overall, this revenue is mostly created by memory components ICs in the very high-end technology. We have in Brazil not only some manufacturing of basic products, different than many people think. We in Brazil have actually the manufacturing of very complex memory components in the packaging area. And we have still a very minimal manufacturing of the wafers and chips from the diffusion sector. But this environment, these companies has been investing in the last 10 years, $2.5 billion in basically CAPEX for production and in equipment and processing infrastructure and training of human research. It's a decent investment for Brazil. It's absolutely very small compared to what the semiconductor companies invest in the world. But it has been enough to bring Brazil semiconductor industry to a level where we can play and we can offer products to a level of the IT industry. We invested 530 million reais in the last 10 years in the IT sector. Mostly this is in the in-house investment, but also investment in the public sector with ICT companies for developing and market research of semiconductor. We basically have PADIS, which is the program for the acceleration of the industrial and developing of the semiconductor industry, where we have 20 companies qualified. And this PADIS program intends to reduce the cost of semiconductor manufacturing in Brazil, basically, and also incentivize the design and the manufacturing in Brazil. Brazil already have around 27,000 square meters of a clean room, different sizes of clean room. I did not mention here, but we have a very small clean room of a class 10 already in Brazil for dedicated for semiconductor design. Because most of the clean rooms we have in Brazil are class 100, class 1,000. We do have some class 10, but mostly 100 and 1,000 in the level of 27,000 square meters in the ABISEMI associated companies. In a total of the manufacturing floor of 40,000 square meters. It's already a very decent number in terms of a manufacturing floor. It employs about 2.4 thousand employees. 500 are researchers, doctors, masters, engineers, and high level and very qualified jobs, and in a very differentiated salary level. I mentioned that we have the PADIS program, which I'm going to talk a little bit about what kind of incentives it gives to us. But these PADIS programs give an incentive of about 300 million reais in the calendar year 2019. Out of these 300 million reais in calendar year 19 of tax benefits, tax reduction, actually these companies inside of ABISEMI actually generate another 200 million in tax collection, which means Even though we have tax incentives, we are paying, we are collecting back to government, kind of paying back these incentives in the level of 70% already. The sector is pretty small. This program started up being used in 2011, even was effective from 2007 as a law was published, but only 2019, the companies is 2011, sorry, companies is starting to utilize this because it's very complex, and now is bringing a level of 3.5 billion reais of revenue with a tax benefits of 300 million only, and then these companies return 200 million. In my opinion, it's pretty much interesting investment from the government perspective because it's generating jobs, high-level jobs, is promoting innovation and technology, and is actually collecting back taxes. As I believe, and I'm going to show later, as we grow the segment, as we grow the activities internally, actually we will return more than we are having as an incentives from the taxes. 50 patents generated in Brazil. Patents should increase fast as we develop process and products. Here is just one example about the application of the semiconductor manufacturing in Brazil. As I mentioned, we have different products, but the biggest revenue comes from memories. And here you have an example of the type of memories we have in Brazil. From the embedded multimedia chip, this is a flash component. LP DRAMs, low power DRAMs, is a DRAM memory components. Embedded multi-chip package, which is actually a combination of a flash component plus DRAM component and a controller IC inside with the firmware in order to manage the data inside the flash and the DRAM. We have the DRAM IC. This is the initial technology when we started doing the packaging in 2005 in Brazil by the Smart Modular Technology, which I am the Vice President and General Manager in Brazil. And we were pioneering doing this product in Brazil since then. With these products, of course, we built another components from the semiconductor for the computer market, especially RTMs, modules of DRAM and modules solid state drive. And applications goes into a large different IT products from servers, notebooks, computers, smartphones, as you can see in this picture. Here I would like to give you an example of what kind of technology we have available in Brazil. Of course, we have design, and we have chip design capabilities, and this slide is not exhaustive, but it gives you an idea that Brazil is able to design controllers, RFID sets, smart card sensors, up to the level of a 130 micrometer SI. Also, Brazil is very much capable. When I'm saying capable, I'm saying that we are designing, we are going to mass production with those products, we are selling those products to OEM companies in Brazil. And in the product level, we have the system in package, which is agglomerate of different dies in the wafer level, or eventually maybe one component already packaged together, and then we do the final packaging, the system packaging and testing. And this could be only made by silicon with, for example, a number of components inside the same package. We have the MCPs, the MMCs I already mentioned, and we also have IoT products, either on the module, either on the SiP side. We have a packaging design. Those packaging components in the memory that we produce in Brazil, for example, on an embedded multi-chip package, those are extremely complex products to build. 10 years, 15 years ago, everybody thought that the semiconductor would only provide, create innovation from the silicon. But that was not what we figured out. From the past 10 years, additional to the innovation in the silicon, there is a huge innovation in the packaging test of those components as it became extremely complex. And as we put in one single chip, integrated components, one single IC. We end up putting in Brazil 12 different dies package, and we do stackings. I have some examples I'm going to explain. And those products are actually designed, developed, not only the product structure, but the materials for that semiconductor and the test. So that is extremely advanced technology nowadays, even though the wafers and the dies are actually imported from Asia as of now. We also have a firm, as I mentioned, we have control, we design controllers, we can build controllers, we package controllers, and we design firmware for controllers to manage the memory data. In terms of a manufacturing process, we actually, semiconductor is actually industry 4.0. In Brazil, we are talking a lot about how can we move to the next step in the industry 4.0. The semiconductor companies that are manufacturing their products in Brazil are already in the level of industry 4.0. I'm saying that we have math, which is extremely complex, with the machine-to-machine communication, with the interaction between machines and engineering, for instance. So in a production line, I will give an example of 100 machines, and this is a kind of a true example we have in Brazil. So we have 100 machines connected, different types of machines for different processes. Those machines manage the materials, they manage their yielding in the process, they stop if they find a mistake, they send an email to engineering to tell them, please come see me because I think I have a problem. So you can monitor the machine, you can improve your yield because they are not going to build bad products. And this is what we already have in Brazil, developing Brazil including. We also have a network system with material vendors and biomaterial vendors, for instance, in case of a wafer. You know, in a wafer, we buy sometimes good dies, non-good dies inside the same wafer. And then we have a connection to the wafer maker. Through the web, through the link, they send what we call wafer map that will map in 1,000 dies inside one wafer, for instance. It's going to tell exactly which one is good, which one is not good for you to build. After 1 month, for instance, bring this wafer to Brazil, put on your inventory, bring to the line. When you put this wafer in your die attach machine, he will connect it to this wafer map in the system, and we will recognize automatically. So the kind of activities to say a field is some of the examples that we have to prove, to show you what we are doing in the industry 4.0 lab in the semiconductor sector in Brazil. We also have robots. I made here some sort of comparison. What we have in our semiconductor packaging only, this is basically most of the packaging companies in Brazil. And there is a definition for what you should consider robots. And looking to those definitions, global definitions is standard, we selected what kind of robots we have handling semiconductor manufacturing in Brazil. And we end up having this number 316 robots per 10,000 employees. Of course, this is a standard, so we don't have 10,000 employees working for semiconductor in Brazil, but based on this index, we could put ourselves compared to Germany, which is the second largest robot country in the world after Korea. So that's the level of semiconductor industry in Brazil. We handle wafers now down to 30 micrometer, which is, you can see the one paper of A4 standard has thickness of a 50 micrometer. So the wafer we are handling is actually almost half of a one paper A4 standard. We stack up to 12 dies in the packaging today. This is in the mass production, in production lines in Brazil. Excuse me, we put 12 dies in one package, and we stack 8 dies in mass production today. In R&D levels under qualification customers today, this is in the level of 16 die stacking already, able to manufacture in mass productions in Brazil. There is a lot of technology in wire bonding and flip chip technology also, and handling substrates under 0.1 millimeter. This gives you an idea that Brazil packaging technology is actually state of the art and very comparable to the largest and the most high-tech companies in the world. This is some of the structures that I'm talking about on the packaging. So you can see here different number of dies, non-flash, for instance, right in the middle here. You can see a number of dies. You can see in yellow the gold wires being connecting one chip to another in different levels. Here you are not seeing perspective, but when you look in perspective, we actually wire bonding somewhat like 600 different wires in one single component, like one of these examples here. That technology includes wide over wide, bonding over bonding, and few different technologies, extremely complex in the packaging area. And this is extremely good to understand because Brazil can go to the next level in future, which we think is especially system in packaging, or not silicon in package, but system in packaging, when we can put different dies with different characteristics in the same packaging to do different types of components in the integrated circuit level. So why Brazil have got to this level at this point, which for many people is a kind of surprise, is because Brazil has the largest industrial park outside of China for IT goods, IT and communication goods. So Brazil has 49 out of 50 brands producing and manufacturing their products in Brazil to sell in Brazil and eventually worldwide, mostly in Brazil actually. So Brazil has a large market for these areas. Brazil, to give an example, in case of smart TV, it is about 11 million units is selling in Brazil. And 90% of those 11 million units sold in Brazil is actually manufactured in Brazil. That gives you an idea about competitiveness and technology. In case of cell phones, which is very high-end technology, 48.8 million units is built in Brazil in 2019. And this is actually the market. 48.8 million units was sold in Brazil in 2019, and 90% of those are actually produced and manufactured in Brazil. And those are products that utilize the semiconductor products and the memory products I was speaking about to you right a moment ago. So it's important to say that the products being launched in Brazil in the IT sector, different than 10, 15 years ago, that was a complaint from the market sector, is now very much with the up-to-date technology. These companies launch their products globally, including in Brazil, with a local product manufacturing in Brazil, with a no lag of space, no lag of time left behind anymore. So kind of a concomitant level. So it can implement, introduce your products at the same time. And that already includes the local semiconductor. Another one is important to say is since 90% of these products are built in Brazil, but for the total market, that means there is a competitiveness in the sector. And of course, now there is exchange rate, which is kind of favorable. But in fiscal year 19, which this data comes from, we did comparisons between for a computer, for instance, in US or Brazil, for a smartphone in US or Brazil. Of course, we need to work on the mainstream where we have volumes, not all the different models, but you can confirm that you're going to pay now the very similar price US and Brazil, being US one of the most cheapest, the cheapest market globally. So Brazil is competitive now for the local made products, which means the IT law really brings a competitiveness to the sector. IT law is the regulation that gives incentives to finishing goods sets, cell phone makers, computer makers, all kind of IT goods and communications. If they produce their products in Brazil, they have certain incentives, and that's why this is extremely, not extremely, but very competitive right now. And then we have an opportunity in Brazil for the exportation, which is not so going well, not so good in 2018, 2019. But I still believe that now with this situation of competitiveness and technology, is possible, and it's very likely that Brazil can ship their products into the Latin America. You know, Brazil is different than China. China is shipping those products in a different way, especially with a very low cost, and Brazil suffer a little bit to compete with China. But China is becoming a little different, everybody know, in terms of production and in terms of world trading. And there is an opportunity for Brazil now to start selling their products in Latin America. So here is a little of the history of what happened in Brazil in the semiconductor. I know this is 30 years ago, but back to this time, it's important to say that Brazil was very well positioned in the 80s with 23 companies doing business in Brazil. I'm not talking about the global companies, of course. But right after this one, several industrial policy did not work well, including the market reserve, which created a market that was not competitive. That's why I was talking about competitiveness a lot, because it means it is very important for us to be successful. But in that moment, there is a lot of opportunity for Brazil. Brazil was better positioned than Taiwan in terms of companies and product and technology on those days. But unfortunately, with a sudden modification in all those regulations, including very fast, and fast means in very couple of months, Brazil changed all the importation taxes, and that ended up making the industry to shut down in Brazil. So all those 22 companies shut down in 2 years, 1990, 1991. All those companies stopped doing products in Brazil, went back to Asia, and start shipping products from Asia to Brazil. In that moment, Brazil government figured out they need to come up with some sort of industrial policy to develop the semiconductor sector, not only the semiconductor, but actually all the IT sector, in order to create and bring those technologies to Brazil, and then develop the production chain of these goods. So the IT law was created in 1991 and started to be regulated and used up to 1993, with tax incentives for the companies that establish our products in Brazil, and also start giving additional incentives if those companies purchase products in Brazil. And in that scenario, we came back with the semiconductor market with smart modular technology being established in 1997, the company which I belong to. And then smart modular technology in 2005 was pioneered with with the semiconductor, return of the semiconductor, especially pioneered with the high-end semiconductor manufacturing in Brazil. After that, PADIS was launched in 2007, I mentioned, and then companies started to be established in Brazil, including CEDA in Rio Grande do Sul, which I think you know extremely well, and then HANA Micro, also in state of Rio Grande do Sul, and then ABISEMI was founded, Multilaser, Unitec, Qualcomm, AData. Now we have Qualcomm announced that they are going to set up a QC manufacturing in Brazil. And then in this scenario is what I'm saying now is a momentum where we have a pretty big number of companies, if you think in one country manufacturing all those products in Brazil with that technology. So pretty much interesting and good momentum for the business. So that these companies are now investing in Brazil. They are investing more in total than what they receive as incentives from the federal government. The incentive from the federal government is basically PADIS. I mentioned a little bit what PADIS is, the semiconductor law to develop the Brazilian industry. PADIS' intention is to equalize cost against imports. So Brazil has a very complex import taxation, and the complexity goes in a way that sometimes a finished good product has, for instance, an integrated circuit, has zero tax, zero importation tax, for the bill material. Some of the bill material, for instance, a gold wire, for that particular to build that particular integrated circuit, has 16% importation tax. So you are not going to be competitive with an integrated circuit made in Asia if you pay 16% importation tax in your gold wire when you make when you manufacture this IC. This is what I want to go for the problem. To say one example that we had at the time, parties came to resolve this problem, and give you importation tax zero for the bill material of semiconductor goods, and that is a very important incentive. But I'll tell you that this is not an incentive for you to produce, but this is actually an incentive because you're going to have the similar cost on your bill material. So it still is just to equalize the cost, not to incentivize. Is this the same for sales tax and purchasing tax that are suspended? And then you have some incentive, that's a real incentive in the withholding tax, the income tax reduction from 25 to 0. But still you pay tax, as I demonstrate before, saying that the incentives you give is actually collect 70% back. Now recently, this PADIS law was changed together, the IT law, because of a modernization of the law based on certain questions we got from the World Trade Commerce. So the sector changed completely the way. And this way now is extremely more flexible for the industry. They have that total choice if they would like to purchase memory semiconductors in Brazil or import. Is they are totally sure there's no obligation of any local purchasing. But since we have this cluster, this system, the beeper points now, as we call, end up being favorable and end up being actually increasing the local demand and increasing the market share of the local products into the Brazilian products, which is a very good news, so that these companies is continue investing. So this is a result of a very interesting and important thing that federal government did with the PADIS. Now, the problem is this law is going to expire in January 2022. So it was published in 2007 to be valid for 15 years. That's why it expires in 2022. But as I mentioned, only companies starting to enjoy or utilize, let's say this way, this benefits from 2011. So from 2007 to 2011, so we lost these 4 or 5 years of tax benefits, and even from 2011, there is only 2 or 3 companies using this benefit. And more recently, as I show in the schedule, as companies start coming and making products for the last 4 or 5 years, so this benefit should now be extended. So our proposal as ABISEMI and the desire of the semiconductor industry in Brazil is to align the PADIS with the IT law, which will last until 2029. So this is what we are now asking federal government to consider, and we are, of course, going to show all the details of numbers, how good, how bad it is, what is the value for this, and how important this is to keep and improve the semiconductor manufacturing in Brazil. So, and then you might be thinking, wow, without an incentive, Brazil would not be competitive. But the reality is, all the governments in every country has been investing a lot in the semiconductor, not only Brazil. If Brazil wants to be a partner, if Brazil wants to be a player in the semiconductor market, Brazil as a government need to think that they need to invest in this sector. Here, this slide is from OCDE. OCDE is the most, is just for the well-developed countries. Well-developed countries should not should have some limitation to provide incentives, as many of us think about it. But here it shows names of companies, and you can see this is all extremely high revenue companies, already consolidated companies. You can see here the names of Intel, you can see Micron, you can see Qualcomm, you can see Samsung, Hynix, all the manufacturing companies actually receives some sort of tax benefit. Still today, this number is this number is actually percentage of revenue and a dollar amount. And to give you an example in here, Intel, which is the #1 company in the world since the beginning of 90s, it still receives from the American government somewhat like $6.6 billion annually. And that represents almost 5% of their revenue in incentives. So that's how this technology survives and grows. That's how the innovation comes, with a policy and with a firm and dedicated intention in investing in this sector. Being that, we know that if we found semiconductor, we absolutely get economic growth. We absolutely promote technological leadership. And that's what we can see in these countries with where these companies are located. So it is very important, though. And also we figure out very clearly, and this is some of the outcomes from the analysis on OECD, government's funding actually lag behind, which means government funding is very much lower than what the private sector invests. So the private sector invests a lot more. If American government invests, like I said in this table, $6 billion in Intel, actually Intel will invest 10, 15 times more by itself, which is extreme. I'm sorry, which is extremely good since they are developing a business and their products and their technology. So semiconductor industry drives the innovation. So Brazil needs to realize that the semiconductor could drive product development. And driving product development, we drive innovation and process development, which drives innovation as well. And also drives innovation for materials and for equipment. So we can burst the growth of different sectors if we promote the semiconductor industry. I understand Brazil has a lot of limitation in many cases, and I'm not saying Brazil will invest like this. But I'm thinking on certain policies required, certain level of investment is required. We should see, and Brazil should think about which is reasonable for us to be able to do. But it is very important that Brazil keep investing in semiconductor more and more. And since we now have the best moment for the past almost 30 years, it's important to keep thinking on how we're going to be the next 10 years, how we can do for the next 10 years for this industry to grow and be even better in terms of not only technology and developing, but also business and future exportation. Well, that was something that I kind of already touched. Brazil has an emerging semiconductor market, even though this is a 3.4 billion reais. This is actually very small in terms of a global market. The global market is very big, so we have a lot of room to grow. But the good news is the industrial part on the semiconductor we have is new, is high-end, is high-tech, and is something that is selling products with good quality, qualifying their products in most of the global IT companies and communication companies. That is extremely important for us to figure out. Also, like I said, the tax collection is already being very much in the same size of the tax waiver in this sector, which is a sign that the investment can show a very good ROI, a very good return of the investment from the government standpoint if we stick to a similar policy. Let's talk a little bit about, I mentioned semiconductor is still small in Brazil. So let's see. So the semiconductor global market has been growing in the level of 7 to 8% yearly. Here it shows that 2019, the total market is $413 billion, pretty big. And it's showing still a growth, even though we have the pandemic globally, even though we saw China being hurt by US policies. And you can see Huawei, for instance, having difficulty to produce its products. even though there is an increase of expectation of increase of 3.2%. And this year we expect $426 billion in the global semiconductor market. And Brazil represents about 2.6% of the worldwide market. If we take a look on those numbers I mentioned for cell phones, for computer, for mobile phones, in the communication areas, you see that Brazil is around 2.5 to 3% of the total global market. So we are always between 2.5 and 3%, not different for semiconductor. So, which means this semiconductor market worldwide, $413 billion, has some very much concentration in logic ICs, which is microprocessor units and controllers, and memories, which I spoke about. Brazil's in the memories. It's important we also grow our business to logic and microprocessors. But it's also possible for Brazil to work on what we call legacy product, or what we call low-end products in terms of technology, which is easier to build, especially because requires lower investment and less IPs for you to be competitive. But we are already playing a market that memories that represents over $106 billion in a year. Here's the memory market. The kind of just focus on this activity is a market of $110 billion this year. Brazil last year $3.4 billion. So kind of $1 billion. So which means we are about 1% of the worldwide market in memories, pretty much small, as you can see. And that is maybe the good news, because we can play more, because Brazil has actually 3% of the total semiconductor market. If we have only 1% of memory, we have 3 times of a market to grow, just in the memory side. When you look to other sectors, not only memory, but what is really bringing volumes for worldwide market is the communication, smartphones, wireless, and Internet of Things, computer and tablets, consumer electronics, and cars, factories, and military and special. Military and aerospace, Brazil does not have much. Factories and robots, Brazil must invest more. But cars, consumer electronics, computer and communication, we are between number 3 and number 6 in all these markets. So we are pretty much big in volume. We have demand, and we are going to grow our demand a lot. So there is an opportunity for Brazil to work on this market. And also, either in cars, automotive, communication, computer, and consumer, we have most of the brands manufacturing those products in Brazil, which give us the opportunity to penetrate in their global projects, offering our local products. And that is what we expect from an industrial policy for this to become true. When you look to the global semiconductor ranking, 2019, I mentioned Intel is number 1, $65 billion in revenue, followed by Samsung memories, micro memories, not only memories, these 3, but memories mostly. Intel also has the memories, by the way. And then you come with a Broadcom, Qualcomm, and Texas Instruments, mostly communication ICs. And then you have a different portfolio of products for different companies. Those are the semiconductor makers. Here, give you an example. What these semiconductor makers invest globally for their business. So if you take a look on Samsung, just doing memories and some controllers, they invest in the level from 10 to 24 billion dollars every year. So if I said that Brazil invested 5 billion in the last 5 to 7 years, now Samsung is investing somewhat like 10 to 24 every year. That's the level of a difference between one company and one country like us. So that's why we need to keep doing investment from either government or private investment in these companies for us to continue developing this business. This is how we estimate Brazil semiconductor market size. This is from ABINI, Electronics Industry Association. And here there is a semiconductor, in Portuguese here, semicondutores. Here in the second line, you can see the history of the importation of one particular tax code for the semiconductor from 2014 to 2019 in the level of $4.6 billion. But additionally, you have a different importation of kits, importation of a certain boards, semi-manufacturing boards in the level of $16 billion, where we estimate 10.7 is actually semiconductor. So again, we are doing $3.4 billion in 2009, billion reais in 2019, which is $1 billion. So we have about 10% of the Brazil market. So there is a huge opportunity to grow for the players in Brazil. And where Brazil is also going to grow or already growing. So everybody's talking about IoT, Internet of Things, Internet of Everything is happening everywhere. Brazil has established a policy from the government standpoint to define patterns for this business in every area, either transport, communication, or cities. And also you have funding from many different government funding. And you have lots of industry interested in developing these products. You have products being developed from different ways, but still the majority of the semiconductor going to the sector are coming from abroad. So the local companies, I think everybody has a focus to develop products for the segment that could bring, it could be the after memory, the second largest business opportunity in Brazil. Well, I think this is what I would like to share with you. And then I think we're going to have some questions. If you have some questions, I'll be more than happy to try to clarify. Thank you very much for paying attention on this. Rafael, I think you can take over and maybe open this for questions, please.
Hello?
Hello.
There was a little problem with the microphone here. So I have one question.
Yes, I was under the impression that Ricardo would come back, but he didn't. I can still see he's trying. So,
Rafael, you are not listening to me?
Now I am.
Yeah, I'm listening now.
Yeah,
now we listen.
First question was done by Cesar Duenas from NXP. How do you handle thermal dissipation in stacked dies?
Well, memory is not the products that we sold is a memory. So memory is not the high product dissipation product, but there are one of the most important thing in this technology is to avoid bubbles or void between one die and another. In order to avoid these bubbles or void, you have to apply a compress pressure before you do the encapsulation or the molding of these products. So usually there is one equipment, compress mold, where you have to utilize in order to make sure you remove those voids, those bubbles. This is one of the most important process for you to be successful in the thermal area of these products. Even though being memory, not much such a dissipation product and not so much a temperature dependent product.
Okay, so now question by Professor José Rodrigo Zambuja. What role does Lei da Informática plays in the semiconductor market?
The Lei da Informática, or IT law, actually does not do any tax incentive for the semiconductor market, but it stimulates the product maker to, since the product maker has incentives, but for them to have incentives, they need to follow some local manufacturing process, which they can select from the design, from the investment in R&D, from manufacturing of boards, from utilization of local semiconductors. So they have a portfolio of items. It depends on each product that they can select what they would like to do in order to be able to be eligible to the tax incentives of the IT law. When they do that, then the semiconductor sector will do everything we can in order to be competitive and be one of their choices. And then we have been successful being their choice because I think we got some level of competitiveness in the sector. That's why I said the overall, all the ABISEMI members are growing their market share in Brazil.
So another talk is by Pedro Henrique. What is the technology tendency for the next years of semiconductor devices? What is the main challenge in additional of stacking process?
Well, system impact is going to be more and more applying every sector. And I showed here some structure made by wire bonding, but actually what's coming is pin through hole. So actually we will see dies that will have holes, and then you're gonna do the connections through the holes. And that's the PTH technology that we think is gonna come already there in many products, but very high-end products now. What is gonna come to consumer products like the products that I showed is going to be the next future for die stacking technology.
So there is another question by Marcelo Pavanello from São Paulo. Dear fellow, how do you see the possibilities for collaboration between university and ABISEMI members?
Well, I see this is extremely important, extremely good. Actually, I just slightly mentioned ABISEMI members has already contracts or developing of a product process for over 60 different R&D institutions and ICTs in Brazil. So this is extremely important because the utilization of the university, the utilization of the intellectual property of these R&D institutions can come to help the developing of these products that the ABISEMI does, and also the process developing, so that there is more and more those investments are being doing in the level of 4, 5, or 6% of their revenues. They are now investing, and I cannot tell you now because I don't know exactly each of the companies, but maybe 50% of this is going through R&D institutions and ICT centers.
Okay, another question by Juan Martinez Brito from CETEC. It is clear that the Brazilian government is dismantling the microelectronics incentive program. TI Brazil is over, CETEC is threatened with liquidation. So do you think the last step would be to end the PADIS? What impact will this have on Smart and other companies if PADIS ends?
I think the Brazilian government has two different thinking to what I can see. By one side, there is still an intention to develop the IT industry, IT semiconductor market, so that we just approve a new IT law and PADIS law. December 26, 2019, President Bolsonaro approved the law 13969, which grants for another 10 years the IT law benefits and the PADIS benefits, with some of these PADIS benefits being ended in 2022. So it's not a 100% of the PADIS benefits will end up in 2022. Some will continue until 2029. So on the other hand, of course, Brazil has an economic problem, and I understand that very clearly. And the other side, they needed to reduce the tax waivers they give to many different businesses. The tax waivers for the PADIS represents 0.13%, only 0.13% of the total tax waivers they give to all kind of areas in Brazil. That is very, very much small, and I don't think it's going to be the focus to resolve the Brazil problem. That's why I hear more like showed how important we continue, but I think it is a very small compared to everything government is giving to other sectors, and is not going to be critical to resolve the Brazil economic problem. So I really think that this is going to continue. And in case of SafeTech, I understand what's happening, but I still have the expectation that the liquidation of the company could bring the utilization of the assets somehow, the utilization of the intellectual property there. They should keep the jobs in different ways. ABISEMI gave some sort of opinion or suggestion, if we can do that, that how this could happen, and I believe the way the liquidation may happen, it will be possible to do those utilizations that way, in order that SafeTech may continue in a very different way. The utilization of the assets, which is many important assets, the intellectual property, the labor, the very high level labor they have there, and of course the intellectual property.
Thank you. So I have a question now from Professor Rafael Brum. In your view, are semiconductor companies leveraging their 5% mandatory investment in research and development to their full potential? Do you think that this policy should continue?
When PADIS was created in 2007 with no company in Brazil, as I mentioned, so it requires 5% of investing R&D, regardless if this is a wafer fab or packaging or test or even a design, in order to keep the tax incentives. And I felt by myself the truth that it was very difficult to expand this 5% of revenues in the beginning. Because when you have a small revenue, 5% is nothing, cannot promote your development. Then you need to expand more. So you're going to expand more than 5. But when you have a decent revenue, then eventually 5% is going to be too much if you are a manufacturing company and not a designing company. So I think moving forward, we should have a better way to return design innovation to government as they expect, rather than a bare and pure percentage of revenue. I saw during this period many companies trying to expand, but not totally in return of their real business development, but sometimes with some designs that may not become true as a marketable, but still, this would give developing for the knowledge, the learning, and developing of the university of the ICT, even though it's not going to become a tradable, marketable product, but it could develop technology that later on it could be enjoyed and utilized to develop another product. So I still think this is a good thing to be done, should continue, but it should be in a way that when as the revenue grow, it may become complex for those companies to follow if they are just a manufacturing, not a designing company.
Okay, thank you. So I also have a question. First, what is your opinion about the macroeconomic vision of the government nowadays? And one example is they showed some time ago a slide. They put in this slide rombo das estatais. That means deficit of the companies of the state. And the top of these companies, it was Embrapa. So that means that they see Embrapa as a company that has a deficit. And they don't consider that Embrapa is one of the main reasons that the agribusiness in Brazil is very competitive, using all the technology that is being developed at Embrapa and so on. And so if you consider the investment of the government in Embrapa is just a very small percentage, I think is 0.05 of the income the government receives by taxes from all these agribusiness and so on. So they are using the same approach also to see CETEC, also only seeing the account of CETEC, not all the ecosystem of the business. And this view that is mainly expressed related to Embrapa and all others strategic companies of that are provided the development of technology in several sectors. So what do you think about this point of view?
Well, I think the economic situation of Brazil is not something that I'm going to discuss in detail, but we all know in the news and is actually very, very complex. Paulo Guedes keeps saying Brazil has broken, so we bankrupt. And I think as a Brazilian, we need to look at this seriously because Brazil needs to fix and gain and regain the ability to invest. As of now, Brazil is not being able to invest and is expected to have a private investment only. And when you think in a country-wise, a private investment, government should drive the investment in infrastructure, for instance, which we are very, which we need a lot. So in that sense, numbers are numbers. So government are just making kind of research, internal research, checking who is making money, who is losing money in their areas, what are the opportunities. So there is a long list, which I'm not 100% aware of all the business the opportunities there, but there is an extremely long list of companies that are not playing well. But among those, it could come companies like CETEC or companies like Embrapa, which, in my opinion, may not be true that those are deficitary. Because eventually, besides the investment versus return, the investment versus profit and revenues, there are additional considerations to make, which includes what level of a benefit for the society and future benefit, investment we make for future, investment we make for developing. If those investments make sense, I think government should continue. And I believe government is in the beginning of this analysis, and eventually will not start for the right way. And that's a difficult thing to say because then you go to politics and then you go to other areas which I'm not going to touch today. But for sure, I believe, just like you explained, Embrapa in CETEC has a specific benefit for the developing of certain technology that matters a lot for Brazil. And we, members of association, the company, societies, and people interested in the sector should demonstrate government about these benefits and the need of the kind of company, especially when, like you mentioned, and I mentioned too, ABIS or Embrapa benefits is so small compared to the level of tax waivers they give around, and is absolutely meaningless for the society. And provided that it brings a level of a certain level of a benefit for the society, future and development, I think we should continue investing. But if this is not bringing any value for future or now, then I may agree with the government why we invest, why we expend money from society in something that's not going to give any return. But the return should not only to be profit, the return could be societal level, developing an innovation, knowledge and technology, like I think semiconductor does.
Okay, I have another question here from Juan Pablo Brito. So do you have a suggestion where a semiconductor business, design house or semiconductor manufacturing can be successful in Brazil besides the memory market? Do you know any market niches that can be successfully explored in Brazil?
I think there is several opportunities and depends what is your goal. If you are a manufacturing company, you need volumes. Memory was a kind of successful and now has 4 or 5 companies doing memories in Brazil. Very unique case globally, saying honestly. You don't find 5 companies doing packaging of memories in one country other than Brazil now. And but the reason is you have the volume. So huge market for phones, huge market for computer, and a growing density is growing market, huge population. The market will only grow, and knowing that, and then you have 90% of those products being built in Brazil. So you then have the opportunity to play. You may do design, and then if you do design, I think globally there is a lot of opportunities for design houses, for developing chips. In Brazil, there is a small companies, but they don't have the volume. So the design house in Brazil, to me, should play globally. But it's difficult to play globally and independently. But if you have partnership, then I think you gain your momentum. So partnership in the global development for design house, I think, is important for trust, credibility, for IP's utilization, and then you start to develop an opportunity if your area is design, as you initially asked.
Okay, so Rogerio, thank you very much for your talk and also the opportunity to answer all these questions. Have a good evening, everybody. Thank you very much again, Rogerio, for your very nice talk. See you all soon.
Thank you. Let me just say thank you again, and thank you, Professor Ricardo. Thank you for the Federal University of Rio Grande do Sul for the opportunity, and I really appreciate having that discussion with you all.
Thank you very much.